Hello and welcome to this episode of Shatterdice Reviews.
Today is our final part of the Resident Evil review series, where we will be looking at Resident Evil the board game by Steamforged Games. Chronologically, the first game in the series of video games, but the third to be released by Steamforged Games. This game is the culmination of their survival horror engine. It features most of the rules from previous installments, along with a plethora of additions and changes to both tighten up the game engine and bring out the feeling of that original video game, set entirely within the confines of a spooky mansion. You would think this gives the game less scope than the city-spanning Resident Evil 3, but Steamforged Games have gone into great detail with this game and made it the biggest of the three, with some of the most nuance and minutiae. Just to be clear, for any of you who are fans of the video games, this board game is based on the GameCube Resident Evil remake and not the original PlayStation 1 game, bringing many of the elements of that remake into this game. So, similar to my Resident Evil 3 review, I will not be covering the basic rules again, as the core gameplay has not changed since Resident Evil 2, but I will be covering any additions and changes that have been made, and this game makes some big changes. The first thing to look at is this new symbol on the character cards. This is the kerosene icon, and represents how many kerosene tokens a survivor can carry. Why would you need kerosene? Well, because if you get your hands on the lighter item card, you can spend kerosene tokens to burn those pesky corpse markers that would sometimes turn into zombies in previous games. Now, with kerosene, you can deal with them permanently. But there is another big change here. In this game, every time you kill a zombie, you will replace its miniature with a corpse marker. This means even when you kill a zombie, a difficult enough task as it is, it still remains a threat, just waiting to get back up to its feet and attack you again. To get rid of them, you have to either burn them with the kerosene, as mentioned earlier, or, if you have a weapon card with this special decapitation symbol, you can use that weapon to kill them and prevent them leaving a corpse marker in the first place. Everyone knows basic zombie rules: destroy the brain or remove the head, which these weapons let you do. As you can already no doubt see, Resident Evil the board game brings in some new interconnected mechanics that cause you to think even more carefully about what you do and how you go about playing the game. The number of corpse markers also leads to this game being much harder than the others, as they can end up all over the board, making it hard to take a single step without one of them stumbling back to its feet. Also, if you want to keep them under control, you need to carry the lighter with you, which takes up an important space in your character's inventory, making resource management even more important. And believe me, you will want to keep that lighter on you and those kerosene tokens stocked up. This brings us on to one of Resident Evil the board game's big new enemies, the Crimson Head. Essentially, a super zombie, faster and more deadly. There is a chance, when one of these corpse markers turns into a zombie, it will instead become a Crimson Head and make your life even harder. This means you may find yourself ending one threat only to have it rise again as an even bigger threat. So killing zombies can actually make the game harder, which is certainly a conundrum that once again really makes you consider your actions more carefully. All I can say is burn those corpse tokens every chance you get. Despite all these changes, they are not the biggest change to Resident Evil the board game. What really sets this game apart from its predecessor is its revamped exploration system. The previous games used fixed maps where you could see everything right from the start. Resident Evil begins its scenarios with just a handful of tiles and doors on the table. In the scenario book, you will see some of these doors are numbered, and this corresponds to those on the board. When you open one of those doors, you will check its number and then find the matching exploration card. For example, if you are playing the first floor west scenario and you go through door 1, you will find the exploration card titled First Floor West 1. The card will have all the information on it for that section of the game board, what tiles and tokens to place and which rooms to put the encounter tokens in. This makes Resident Evil's maps procedurally generated, cutting down initial setup time and keeping aspects of each game hidden. However, bear in mind there is no randomness here. Door 1 will always lead to card 1, door 2 to card 2, and so on. What this really does is prevent you from knowing right off the bat where the all-important C item is, or those scenario-specific B items. I mentioned something a moment ago that makes a huge change to this game, and that is encounter tokens. Unlike the previous games that used a fixed table you would roll on to spawn monsters, Resident Evil the board game uses these coloured encounter tokens depicting a number of cards on them. Yellow shows 1 card, amber 2, and red 3. This corresponds to how many encounter cards you will draw when entering a room. Yes, Resident Evil replaces those tables with a deck of cards. This deck will have cards added and removed from it over the course of the campaign, making an ever-evolving roster of monsters and horrors for you to face off against. Perhaps more importantly though, these encounter cards bring much more tension to the game and more unpredictability. When you enter a red room, you will draw 3 cards, but you could get lucky here and end up spawning mostly corpse markers, making the supposed dangerous room quite safe. Whereas when you enter that yellow room, the 1 card you draw might be a hunter, or even worse, Lisa Trevor. I'm not going to cover Lisa Trevor much. She is the stalker enemy for this game, similar to Nemesis in Resident Evil 3, but much worse. She is absolutely relentless and brings some real challenge to the game. She is an absolute nightmare. In a good way, of course. So, that's new combat mechanics, new enemies, new character attributes, and resources, along with an entirely new way of exploring and spawning enemies. As you can already see, there are a lot of changes here, and it makes this game a completely different beast. And if you think that's all, it's not. There is also the Character Reserve and Mission cards. The Character Reserve existed in Resident Evil 3 as a deck where you placed any survivors you had rescued over the course of the campaign. It returns here, but with one key difference. These survivors don't sit around idly, waiting for you to pick them for a scenario. They go off and do their own thing in the background, and this is where missions come into play. This deck of mission cards represents what the other survivors are doing while you play through the main scenario. When a game effect instructs you to draw a mission card, you will assign a character from the reserve to attempt that mission. For example, you may draw a mission card that states you must find 4 clues to complete the mission. Completing a mission usually gets you some kind of reward, and failure of a mission almost always has a negative consequence. So how do they work? How do we find these clues? Well, this is where the encounter deck pulls double duty. As well as spawning monsters on the board, it determines the course of these missions. Here's how. When a survivor is assigned to a mission, turn over the top card of the encounter deck and check these icons along the top edge of the card face. This magnifying glass represents a clue. So, going with our example mission, we need to find 4 clues, and we just found 1. So we need to continue flipping cards until we find 3 more. Oh, just to be clear, ignore the monster spawn text, it has no effect during these missions. So, all we need to do is find 4 clues. Simple enough, right? Well, hold your horses there. If you reveal a card with this blood splatter symbol, then the survivor assigned to the mission takes 1 damage, and if you turn over enough of these damage icons to kill that survivor, that's it. Not only is the mission failed, but the survivor is gone from the campaign for good. To avoid this, you can choose to abandon a mission any time before turning over a card, but of course you will incur the penalty for failure. This system really amps up the tension, as you may have a survivor desperately trying to accomplish a mission and find a first aid spray or some sorely needed bullets that will really help you out in the main scenario, but you keep turning over blood splatter icons. And now, this hapless survivor is 1 card flip away from mission accomplished or certain death. Do you dare turn that last card, hoping for that all-important clue? Or will it be the end for this poor soul, doomed to join the shambling undead that roam the hallways? Well, that's a decision for you to make. Right, so, we've seen a lot of changes to this game, and Steam Forged Games brings us 1 more in the form of puzzles. Puzzles were a huge part of the original video game, and they are brought into this game in the form of crest tokens and cards. The game contains 4 of these crest tokens, and their matching cards. Many scenarios include a special puzzle mechanic that utilises these components. Each puzzle is a unique mechanic that will have you interacting with these components slightly differently to solve it. This usually involves cards being face down along the puzzle track on the campaign sheet. You will interact with the crest token in various ways and are usually trying to get all the crest cards face up or in a particular order. Normally, this is crucial to progressing through a scenario. Some of the puzzles are interestingly linked to doors, where certain doors are locked or unlocked in line with one of the crest tokens. These puzzles can actually get quite complex and give you pause for thought as you figure out the best way to efficiently get through them. There's clearly been a lot of thought put into these, and it really helps bring out the feeling of the puzzles found in the original video game. Steam Forged Games definitely deserves a round of applause for finding a way to do this, as I can imagine it was a massive challenge to implement. Well, that's most of the changes and additions to the game, but before we move on, let's take a quick look at the campaign in this instalment of the series. Resident Evil's campaign is a massive one. The core game is about the same length of Resident Evil 3's campaign and its expansions. If you add to that the Bleak Outpost and Into the Darkness expansion boxes available, then Resident Evil the board game has a campaign of around 30 scenarios that will keep you playing for quite some time. The scenario cards from Resident Evil 3 also make a return, letting you know if a scenario is locked and which of those special C items you need to unlock it. These cards all get placed adjacent to each other, forming a map of the mansion and charting your path through the campaign. It's kind of an aesthetic thing, but it is kind of cool to visualise your path through the mansion. What is really important to know about the campaign though, is if you are using the expansion content, then unlike Resident Evil 3, where the City of Ruin expansion was a linear bolt-on campaign to the sandbox, Resident Evil integrates expansion scenarios into the main campaign. This makes the campaign setup far more complicated, as you will have to structure the entire C deck differently, depending on how many expansions you have. This is worth knowing, as if you do not read these instructions carefully, you can set up the campaign wrong and ruin the whole experience. Well, that's enough about changes and rules. Let's get to the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good. Well, it's the same solid gameplay as the previous games. If you have played and enjoyed the other games, there is more of it here. Quite a lot more, with that huge campaign length. The kerosene and burning mechanics are also a great addition, bringing in more of that strategic forward thinking and resource management, as you have to decide which corpses to burn and which to leave. After all, you cannot burn them all. The increased difficulty is also welcome. I loved Resident Evil 3, but it was admittedly a touch easy. Resident Evil is definitely the most challenging of the three games, but it never feels unfair, and thankfully it is not really the luck-based artificial difficulty of many games. This game's difficulty is dictated by how you manage those corpse markers and ration your ammo, which survivors you pick for a scenario, where some will be better suited to different scenarios. Of course, luck does play a part in it, but it's not the be-all and end-all of this game's challenge. The bad. To be honest, I found the campaign setup fiddly and annoying with those expansions. They really cause a lot of messing about, adding in and taking out all sorts of cards. Perhaps worst of all, it is easy to miss some of the rules additions specific to scenarios, such as adding new monsters to the encounter deck. This is because much of this information is detailed at the front of the expansion scenario booklet, not in those specific scenarios. So every time you start an expansion scenario, make sure to check the rules in the front. I missed this at one point and didn't add an important enemy to the encounter deck for 2 entire scenarios. I finally realised my mistake because of my familiarity with the video game and checked why these particular enemies had not shown up yet. I think these details should really have been added in the scenario briefs, so it's a lot harder to miss. Also, the exploration system is a fantastic idea, but honestly it's poorly implemented. This was the game's chance to add a random element, making scenarios feel different every time you play. The way the rules work though, is that you are just setting up a preset board one piece at a time. This is frustrating, as it just causes breaks in play to set up more tiles and counters. Honestly, sometimes I just feel like revealing all the cards and setting up the entire map at the start of the game, so I wasn't stopping and starting during gameplay. I think the way this should have worked is that some of the doors on the board should have led to a single random tile you would draw from the exploration deck, so most of the map would be visible right from the start, but the crucial C item, or the B items, could be in any one of these unrevealed rooms. It would have been a simpler setup, and made replays of the game tense instead of tedious. The ugly. The campaign length. It's not bad to have more of this great gameplay, but honestly, 30 scenarios is a lot. If you love the Resident Evil system, this is good. But think of it this way, if you play one game a week, you will be playing this game for over 6 months to finish it. It starts to feel like it's overstaying its welcome, and the scenarios can start to feel very similar. Other than that, it has some of the same uglies as Resident Evil 2 and 3, such as lackluster narrative and repetitive tiles, but that's about it really. So overall, what do I think of Resident Evil the board game? Another really good entry, bringing in some really good new mechanics, while maintaining that solid core gameplay, going all the way back to Resident Evil 2. It's impressive that this is the third game using the same system, yet still manages to feel pretty fresh and different. If you are just playing the base game, then this gets a very solid, rarely a boring rating. But if you are using the expansions, then honestly, by the back end of the campaign, the magic starts to fade, and I have to give it the rating of overstays its welcome. So, here we are at the end of this Resident Evil series, and I suppose I should answer the question, which of these 3 games is my favourite? I'll keep it short, Resident Evil 3. Ironically, my least favourite of the video games makes for my most preferred of the board games. Resident Evil 2 had its teething problems of being a new system, and Resident Evil 1 is really ambitious, but fumbles the ball a bit with things like the exploration system being kind of pointless, or the convoluted expansion integration. Resident Evil 3 makes for the perfect middle ground, refining the rules but keeping the experience straightforward and simple. Also, Resident Evil 3 was easy, and I got the S rank from the epilogue cards. That might make me a little child who likes to win, but I don't care. Anyway, I'm bored of reviewing these games now. Bye.